Today's episode is brought to you by LaRosse Media. They make professional videos to fit any budget, so next time you need a commercial, promo, or corporate video, think LaRosse. Check them out at larossemedia.com. Hello and welcome to the Stinking Albatross Podcast. My name is Alissa and I'm here with my partner in crime, Scott Hayward. How's it going, Scott?
Good, Alissa. How are you?
Not too shabby. A little bit of a late start. I mean, you guys wouldn't know that unless I just told you, which I did. So we're off to a little bit of a late start. But yeah, things are going well. We are finished our summer streaming speaker series. I don't know why streaming is in my head today. Our summer speaker series. So if our listeners didn't listen to any of the guest interviews, definitely go back and check those out. They were pretty cool and pertinent given what we're talking about today. But how's life? What's going on?
Actually, we got to record this real quick because I have moving estimators coming in about an hour and a bit, and we're getting ready to make the big move back home to Manitoba. So we got to move all our stuff, almost halfway across the country, and that costs a pretty penny. So I'm shopping around trying to get the best bang for our buck. And I've never moved stuff before across the country, and I can't do it in a U-Haul because I don't think that's quite big enough, and then have to fly back and forth because we have the vehicles here. So it probably just saves us money if we just hire people to do it. Plus, I'm not in my 20s anymore, and I don't really feel like moving a bunch of furniture myself. I think I'd rather just pay people to do it, and then I can just focus more on work as opposed to taking a whole week off to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think people hear too often the phrase "I'm moving to Brandon, Manitoba," but here you are, folks.
Well, the one mover I talked to yesterday, the one estimator that came in, he said you'd be shocked at how many people are, because I'm just outside the GTA, right? Just outside of Hamilton. He said you'd be shocked at how many moves I'm doing west, whether it be, he said, a lot to Manitoba. That doesn't necessarily mean Brandon. A ton to Alberta, and then to a lesser extent, but still lots out to the Maritimes because housing costs are just
cheaper,
so much less in the Maritimes, and there are generally far better job prospects in the West.
Yeah, I have a friend, one of my best friends lives in South Bend, Indiana, and she's looking to buy a house, and it is crazy, the housing prices there. Like 3,000 square foot, huge pool house, beautiful homes for like $319.
Yeah.
I'm like,
which would be like just under 500 Canadian.
It was like $100,000 more here when I did the exchange. So like, I don't know. There's a lot of negatives about living in the States, but that is definitely a positive. You could live in like a Kardashian mansion for half $500,000.
And most places, you get to New York City, you get to LA, and then it gets kind of like Toronto, Vancouver.
Yeah, but then you're also going to be killed by a drug addict or a homeless person, so who would want to live there anyway?
Not Ben Shapiro.
No. Speaking of which, I'm going to see Ben Shapiro. Got tickets. He's coming to Calgary, so that'll be interesting. We'll see how he is as a public speaker. Have you ever seen him in person?
No, because I think this is the first time he's actually come to Canada, is it not?
No, he went to Vancouver because I remember somebody on Twitter, because the event in Calgary was advertising like it was the first time Shapiro's coming to Canada, and they were like, we brought him to our university campus. So they had to switch that tagline.
Oh yeah, I think that was shortly before COVID, the COVID-19 restrictions. Yeah.
So it'll be interesting, that's for sure. A conservative dream date night, like me and like 3 other couples are going together. So fun times in Calgary. So I mean, you and I, we just got back from the Conservative Convention in Quebec City.
Yes.
And we just released our summary about it on our website called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So if you want to read that, you can check it out on our blog webpage. But we will recap a little bit here on our podcast as well. It was quite a long journey. I personally flew from Calgary to Toronto and then slept overnight, and then we woke up at like 5 in the morning and then took the train, an 11-hour train ride from Toronto to Quebec City with a stop in Montreal, or like a change up in Montreal. So I actually didn't mind stopping in Montreal because it kind of cut it up a bit. It wasn't just like an 11-hour straight. And then when we got there, we had to walk to where we were staying. It was super hot. We had all our luggage. But overall, it wasn't too bad.
We got kicked out of the restaurant in our layover in Montreal.
Yeah.
We just had to sit, 2 feet over, and then it was fine.
Yeah, I've never I know a lot of people, and I've been to pro-life events in Quebec, and all those people are nice, but the general populace I feel hates me. I feel like they can just smell the conservative pro-lifeness on me and just hate me.
The Albertan.
Right off the bat. Yeah. They're like, "We know that you're a social conservative from Alberta. Get out of here." Because like my husband and I went to Montreal at Christmas just to visit, and we got yelled at in a grocery line for seemingly no reason, or still we don't know what the reason was. So
But I feel like that's more of a
yeah.
Montreal thing than a Quebec City thing. Because when I was in,
Yeah.
because when I was in Quebec City, and because I had to stay, because you left a little bit earlier, so unfortunately you
Mhm.
weren't there for the whole plenary. Because flying in a Quebec City is quite difficult. Usually WestJet stops after Labor Day, but they chartered a couple more flights for all
Mhm.
the delegates that were heading out of Quebec City going west. So I decided to take the train the next day to go back home, which meant I have Saturday night by myself. And after spending a whole weekend talking to a bunch of people and dealing with all the stuff we had to deal with, I was perfectly fine to do that. So I went to Old Town
Yeah.
Quebec, which is like 500 years old, and went around there, which was absolutely gorgeous at night. Saw a few friends of ours from the convention as well at different patios and whatnot.
Mhm.
But talking to the restaurateurs there and service staff, like it was quite a bit different than my experience in Montreal for the most part.
That's fair. Yeah, we had a really good waiter one of the nights, but he was from France.
Oh, that's
So
right. Yeah. The place that we went to that was literally right next door to the drag bar.
yeah. That was very fitting,
Yeah.
given the convention. Okay, so let's just kind of recap from the beginning. So
Sure.
basically, how we became delegates and how you can become a delegate to go to these conventions is that you have to sign up at your local ADA. Just look up your local riding district association and sign up, so you get the emails, and they'll send you an email about their delegate selection meeting.
Well,
Now, make
first,
sure that
first,
you're
first,
a
first.
member.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say. First, you have to make sure you're a member of the party, and for at least 21 days prior.
Yeah, so just become a member. Just always have a membership, because you never know when a nomination's happening or a leadership race is happening or convention. So it's just always good to have a membership regardless, so you're not scrambling. So you'll get an email saying when the delegate selection meeting is. You go to the meeting on that date and time, and then you put your name forward as a delegate. So 10 people can go per riding association, and then is it one youth delegate?
One of those 10 would be a youth delegate, and then
Yeah.
the president of the EDA and the either member of parliament or the candidate of record if the conservative candidate in the previous general election or by-election lost, that's known as your candidate of record, they're automatic voting delegates. So those two get to go, then an extra 10, and then one of those 10 extra spots is reserved for a youth delegate who is someone who has to be 24 years or younger. So if you have 11 people who are over 24 years old going for 10 spots, only 9 of those 11 can go.
Okay, so yeah, then if they have more people than seats who want to go, then they'll be voting at the delegate selection meeting, and then you'll basically do a little intro. Usually, you do a little intro, talk about why you want to go, your involvement in the party, and then people vote as to whether or not you'll be a delegate. And then the people who have the most votes go, and you'll probably be an alternate. So if somebody backs out, then you can fill in that spot, and then you can always try and go from a different riding that hasn't filled their spots in the same province. So if you know somebody from a neighboring riding or something like that, and they don't have all their spots filled, you can always apply or meet the president and talk about them potentially backfilling you in that riding, which isn't as common, but it can be done. And so that's basically.
Yeah, and for this convention in particular, because it was in Quebec City, a lot of the riding associations, a lot of the EDAs that normally have a full slate of delegates and normally have to have elections at the delegate selection meeting didn't this time. So
Yeah.
it's actually, I think it's relatively rare for votes to be had at delegate selection meetings,
Yeah.
because most people who
Not in Alberta, but yeah.
yeah. Well, it really depends where the convention is, right? For example,
Mhm.
there were a lot of riding associations in Alberta that didn't send full slates this time. So
I think most did, even though where it was in Quebec.
talking to the National Council candidates from Alberta, it was definitely not a full slate of candidates. There was no province, I think, except for maybe PEI, that had a full slate of delegates.
So they had 3 or something.
40.
4. Oh, really? Is that many?
Yeah, 10 times 4.
Oh, okay.
4 seats. Yeah.
They had a full slate? That's crazy.
I'm pretty sure they did, because every time, and we'll get into this later, but when you saw the provincial breakdown and you saw the percentages, they were always even numbers. So I think they had 40, and they were usually voting as a block. That, or they just had like 10 and they were voting as a block.
That seems more likely. Okay, so then you have to sign up and register online, and then you have to buy your own tickets, flight tickets, and then book your hotel. So then you arrive at convention. Then there is opening night. So usually it's like there's some speeches, there's usually an act of some kind, and then there's
Cirque du Soleil
hospitality
this time.
suites. I don't think it was Cirque du Soleil.
I thought it was. I thought it was.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
at the beginning, I thought it was. Yeah,
Yeah, it was.
or something.
It was funny.
Or something like that.
It's always amusing, and you're like, where am I? It just seems so odd for a conservative convention. And so what really struck us opening night was that you had various MPs come and do little 5-minute talks. But the thing is, regardless of who the MP was, what their background was, but we know that they're passionate about, every single speech was the same.
Wait.
Maybe
I can do it. I can do it here and say because you can go watch it, and I don't know why you would. You can go watch the entire proceedings of the Conservative convention on CPAC, but I'm going to save you 90 minutes, because it was 90 minutes of the same speech from 10 different people. And it was, we're going to axe the tax. We are going to have affordable housing, and we're going to bring it home.
Yeah.
Oh, and common sense.
Yeah, I find it funny too when they're trying to amp up the crowd and they come up to the mic and they say, "Who's ready to axe the tax?" Everyone's like, "Yeah!" People are, no one is excited about this. I'm sorry, no one is. Yes, we all are against the carbon tax, but who is literally we're ending slavery excited about axing the carbon tax? It's just such a fake enthusiasm, and I hate all the fakeness and all the kind of propaganda talking points that are just trying to be implemented in your head and hammered into your head as much as humanly possible. We're idiots that we don't know that you're just giving us the same filtered bullcrap over and over again. It is nauseating. I think this is the part of politics that I absolutely despise, the fakeness. Nothing's real. It's just all coined propaganda from OLO. You had Jamil Javani, who clearly is an amazing speaker.
He's the one that delivered it the best.
And he does, but I'm just saying, he has so many amazing thoughts. He's such a solid conservative. He's so good across all different issues. And they have him giving this pegged, coined speech. It was just no, this is not, you're not using his talents right now. He could have actually for real amped up the crowd, but they just gave him the, "Who's ready to axe the tax?" It's just please stop saying that. I can't handle it anymore.
You did notice at the beginning with the first one, I can't remember who the first one was, people were more excited when they heard it, but by the 12th time, 90 minutes later, it was just a light kind of soft applause in the background from 2,500 people.
Yeah, I don't care if you're the most staunch conservative president of your EDA for 40 years, diehard, would take a bullet for Pierre Poilievre. You are not that excited about that after hearing it, 10 times over and over again. So I guess that's a very annoying part of it. And then they had a main speaker. What was it? Who was it again? It was him and his wife.
He's a retired major general from the Canadian Armed Forces.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can't remember his name for the life of me.
I'm pretty sure he went off script. Because he did talk about COVID stuff. He talked about the truckers, and he talked about tearing down statues and things that, were sort of cultural. And then I think people started to get more interested. But again, he was kind of going on about axing the tax at the beginning, and you're just like, I'm about to leave, and then I actually hear something substantive, and I stayed. And I'm glad that I did, because they did a good job.
Yeah, yeah, and that by far got the most excitement from
Yeah.
the crowd, right? And
Yeah.
when he was talking about being anti-woke, and then actually went to define it properly and gave proper examples of what that means, that's when people responded well. So
Yeah.
then the speeches were wrapped up, and we went to a couple hospitality suites, unfortunately in Quebec City. So this is the first in-person policy convention for the Conservative Party of Canada since 2018. So it had been over 5 years, because the one in 2018 was in May, and this one it was in September. And I think I kind of just got, it was smaller for sure. There's no doubt about it. So I don't know how they came and said, this is the largest attended, because it was quite clearly that it wasn't.
Yeah.
Halifax by far, it was like almost 1,000 more people in Halifax.
At least.
Yeah, but whatever. I think that like there's some muscle memory that was being lost, because either that or it's just so bloody expensive, because there were way fewer hospitality suites both on the opening night and then on the Friday night. And then the hospitality suites that were there generally, not for sure across the board, but generally were a lot worse than they have been in the past. Like there was a little bit of drink to be had, some food. It really wasn't like, it was just like in a bright room, kind of meeting room off to the side. Like it wasn't actually decorated. You didn't know whose room it was. It was kind of weird that way. So yeah, that kind of sucked. We kind of went on our own and found our own place instead with a couple of people.
Yeah. And that honestly was better. But I mean, I hope they get the hospitality suites back on track, because those can be really fun, especially if they're done right.
Well, we're gonna
at the next convention.
We're definitely gonna do one at the next convention. We didn't do one at this convention because we knew that there was gonna be like at least 1,000 fewer people there, and so we didn't want to spend our investors' hard-earned money that they give us to invest properly to make sure that we get results. And part of investing that properly is showing up well at places like convention. But when you know that this one's going to be smaller, and there's not going to be as many of our supporters there as there would be at previous conventions and future conventions, it's probably best to just save that for future conventions. And seeing what the other hospitality suites were and how small of a convention it was, I'm really happy that we made that decision.
Yeah. So then the next day is this, was it the
Friday?
Yeah, Friday. So that's a full day. You get up really early in the morning, and we got up really early in the morning. We did a podcast with Radio Canada. That was about an hour. And then we were in the constitutional policy workshop, so breakout room. So this is where the different constitutional policies are passed or they don't make it to the plenary the next time.
Let's quickly talk about how constitutional amendments to the party's constitution and then policy proposals for the party's official policy handbook get to convention real quick. So just to give a bit of background for everyone out there, the way it works for the Conservative Party of Canada, and it is wildly different between all the federal and provincial parties out there. Oftentimes when it comes to, memberships and nominations and things like that, it's basically the same for federal and provincial parties in Canada. But when it comes to policy conventions, it's wildly different. Strangely enough, the party that's actually closest to federally to the Conservatives on this type of stuff is the NDP. So think of that as what you will. But for the Conservative Party of Canada, in order to get a constitutional proposal through, your EDA board of directors will write up a constitution amendment. They will put it on an internal website called Ideas Lab. It has to be seconded and then supported by 4 other EDAs across Canada, at least one of whom has to be from a different province as yours. And then all the constitutional proposals that go on Ideas Lab are voted on by the different EDAs. You have only a certain number of votes. I think for Constitution it was 25. And then you do the same thing for policy. And then each ADA got to vote for 5 different policies. So then the 30 most popular constitutional amendments go to convention. And then for policy, it's the 70 most popular, including regional priorities. And regional priorities are just simply when bunch of party members get together in a specific location and they will vote on the policy that they like most. And despite how that policy does in Ideas Lab, because that Saskatchewan regional meeting or that Southern Alberta meeting, whatever it is, voted for that, it automatically goes to convention. So before it goes to the plenary room where all 2,500 delegates get to vote on the Saturday, it goes to a breakout room. And this is the room that you're talking about, Alissa. So this is the room that determines which constitutional amendments that were the 30 most popularly voted across the country by the EDAs, then move on to the big room, the plenary room, the next day.
So you're probably like thinking constitutional amendments, who cares? That's not party policy. It doesn't have anything to do with social conservatism. But the thing about the constitutional amendments were that the ones put forward, many of them were trying to make it so that the nomination process was more transparent and left it to the hands of the local EDAs and not Ottawa, not Pierre Poilievre or the leader of the opposition's office. So, for example, if they disqualify a candidate, then there are different means to overrule that disqualification based on the EDA, to have the candidate give a specific reason why. And if National Council votes on whether or not to uphold that disqualification, to have that vote become public so we know which national councilors voted which way. All of these things were constitutional amendments that would have made this nomination process and the disqualification process way more transparent. And this is all down to what happened with Garrett Van Dorland in Oxford, because what happened was so shady and caused such an uproar that I think many people in the Conservative Party, regardless of whether they were social conservatives or not, did not like the way that played out and did not want to see that happen again. So all this to say is that the grassroots and the party base wanted these constitutional amendments passed, but guess what? OLO, Pierre Poilievre, they did not, because they want to have control. They want to be able to pick and choose who the candidates are. They want to be able to drop candidates in, parachute them in where they want. And they want to be able to make sure that National Council upholds their disqualification, so it doesn't make them look stupid. So it was quite chaotic from the beginning, because the chair was Robert Batherson. He was the former president of National Council. And how it works is that you basically have this side, and it says yes on one side, no on the other. And if you want this constitutional amendment to pass, you have to put up your sign yes, and then all those who don't put up their sign no. And Robert Batherson solely is the one to decide whether or not the motion passes or fails by just looking at the signs. So if you have a room full of 1,000 people, it's kind of hard to tell at times how many are yeses and how many are nos. And also it's very, very easy to just say motion failed, even though people have eyes and we can see that there were way more yeses than nos. And there's no room to call for a revote or to demand a count or that kind of thing. It's up to the discretion of the chair. So you can take on the next part, Scott.
Yeah, so I noticed at least on the second vote this happened. So, all the green cards go up for yay, all the no cards go up the red cards go up for no, and you can usually tell, right? Like the whole point of the cards is to make the thing go faster. So, 80% of the room, it looks like, is green, and then 20% of the room is red, then motion pass, right? And then you move on. It's designed to go fast. It's not designed to be abused, which was happening. So on the second vote of the 37 constitutional amendments, and the reason it's 7 and not 30 is because National Council gets to propose 7 constitutional amendments if they so choose, which they did. So when we went into this room, the idea of talking to different people who have been working on this for the last 2 years since the last convention, pro grassroots party members that are part of the National Constitution Committee or National Council or different EDAs across the country, whether they're pro-life or not or social conservative or not, they agree with us that they want more transparency with internal party dynamics, internal party bodies, and internal party elections like nominations. So speaking to them prior to this convention, we thought, okay, the name of the game isn't necessarily getting the best speakers up there to speak in favor of these constitutional proposals, because the vast majority of people in the room are going to want them. The name of the game is to make sure that we get them all passed within the 3-hour time window, because if 3 hours is up and we still have 5 or 6 constitutional amendments to discuss, which, by the way, all the really good ones they put at the end for that reason, then the chair could say, oh, I'm sorry, 3 hours is up, and whatever's passed moves on, and the meeting is over, and the other ones die on the order paper because time has ran out. So we said, okay, we're going to find people to speak to this, but we're going to get them to speak real fast, because for every constitutional amendment, and this is in the rule book, you get to have 2 people speak in favor and 2 people to speak against. And so we said, okay, the people we're going to speak in favor, they're going to be real quick. So you'd say, hi, my name is Scott. I'm from the riding of Hamilton East Stony Creek. I think this is a great constitutional amendment because it gives more power to the party members. And so I encourage you all to vote for it. Thank you very much. Done. 10 seconds, right? And then that way, instead of taking the full 60 seconds, you're saving time and moving it along. So we thought that would be our biggest enemy, but it wasn't. The biggest enemy was just basic corruption, because like Alissa said, all the green cards go up and all the red cards go up. And for that second vote out of the 37, it was obvious that there were way more green cards than red cards. And then Rob Bathurst says, oh, well, motion failed. And I didn't super care about that particular constitutional amendment. So I thought, oh, okay, I'm not going to be a dick about it. I'm not going to like call from the floor for a count. I'm just going to drop and move on. Well, it happened again 2 votes later on the 4th vote. I'm like, oh, okay, I see what's happening here.
Yeah, and there's no room for interpretation. Like, this was very objective. It was overwhelming yeses and like very few scattered no's, to the point where when he said motion failed, everyone's looking around the room like, what?
People started groaning. People started yelling at him. And then on that 4th vote, I started screaming at the top of my lungs, count, and other people did throughout the room. So then now the chair feels like he's losing the room. Mm-hmm. So now the chair feels pressure because they can do a count. So they started doing counts. And this is something that's happened since the founding convention back in 2005 for the party. So you have party staff going up and down. So they say, okay, everyone who wants to vote in favor of the motion, raise your cards. And then the counter comes by, and then they'll literally point like I am. And then when they point at you counting your card, you put your card down. And then you have, maybe 10 counters or whatever. They go up to the front, they give their counts, and then they do the same for the nose. And then they give the count vote out. So some of these counts were like so obvious, should have been so obviously in our favor. And they said, oh, you lost by 30 votes or whatever. And we're like, okay, that's weird. But at that point, for that 4th vote, when we called for a count and the count was obviously wrong, I had no fewer than 3 MPs come up to me who were in that room and said, Scott, you need to get your own counters. So then
at one of the votes, it was like, okay, motion failed 300 to 301. He literally said it failed by 1 vote. We're like, what?
So then we started getting our own counters. And then when they saw that we were doing our own counters and we would call for a count from the floor, because he definitely misinterpreted the cards and on purpose, they would stop doing the counts, because like you said, Alissa, it's the chair's discretion. So when they saw that we had our own counters that were auditing their counters, all of a sudden no more counts. But as this was happening, all of a sudden all these party staffers, people who work for the Conservative Party of Canada, people who work in the office.
You're missing the best part. So before that happened,
so they would do counts, but they wouldn't reveal what the number. He stopped revealing what the numbers were.
Yeah, he would do counts, and then he would say motion failed, and everyone from the room would say like, what was the count, like numbers and tally, and he would say it's up to the discretion of the chair not to reveal the actual vote count,
even though he had already up to that point.
Yeah, he had already. So, and these were on these very specific amendments that would have made it the nomination process more transparent. So then Scott Reed, who is the caucus chair, goes up to the mic and he says, point of order. And he just lays into Robert Batherson so hard, it fed my soul, and it will continue to do so for months to come. Just saying, how dare you disrespect the people of this room? If I did this in caucus, I'd be hung. You're not chairing this properly. We deserve to have the count. We better have the count. Like, this is just a disgrace. Just absolutely laid into him. And then when he was finished, the entire room erupted in cheers and applause. Like, it was the best thing ever. But the problem was, even though it happened a little too late, because a lot of these abuses had already happened. So once Scott Reed just absolutely laid into Batherson, Jenny Byrne, people and staffers in the OLL were in the corner of the room, and this is where you can continue.
Yeah, so then what was happening is when you come to convention, they'll give you your name badge, and then you'll have a little colored ribbon at the bottom of the badge. So at this convention, for Alissa and I, we are full voting delegates. So it says delegate on a green badge, on a green ribbon underneath our name badge. If you are a staffer, then it will say staffer, and then it's on the blue ribbon at the bottom of your badge. If you're a non-voting delegate or an alternate or an observer, it's a red ribbon, so on and so forth. So, Thursday night and Friday morning, I see all these staffers because I know them. Some of them are friends or acquaintances or whatever, and they're all milling about, and they all have these blue staffer badges on. But because I do believe that we did win those votes, I do believe that we were winning those votes, and those counts were absolute lies. All of a sudden, the room starts to swell, and all of these staffers who had blue badges now had green badges, and now they're voting delegates. And I don't know this for sure, but what I was told from different people and what I know that has happened in the past at previous conventions, like Alissa said at the beginning, each EDA has 10 delegate spots, but very few EDAs sent a whole slate of delegates to this convention in Quebec City. So you have 2, 3, 4 open spots on hundreds of EDAs across Canada. And you also have, probably a couple hundred staffers there. What I was told that was happening, and I tend to believe this, although I would like to say that I have no absolute proof of this, although I did see changes on ribbons. You had the executive director of the party, because only the executive director can do this as per the Constitution, appoint on the spot staffers to now be voting delegates for certain ridings that didn't have a full slate of delegates elected to come to convention. So they were backfilling ridings, get them into that room, and they started flooding the room. So then they overtook the room. And then by the end, when we were doing our counts and they were doing their counts, they were basically the same because they had flooded the room. But only staffers could enter the room. Other people who heard this, who were in other rooms at that point, regular party members, they couldn't enter the room, but the staffers who were backfilled as voting delegates, they could then enter the room once they barely had a majority, and it would have been a very small majority that they had.
The first half, you could come and go out of the room as you please, and
which
then
is
the
normal.
Second half, they weren't letting anyone back in the room once if you left, or if you weren't there in the first place, you couldn't come into the room
unless you were a staffer.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is all the games that were played behind the scenes just to continue to grasp onto what power they have. And it definitely is disappointing. So when we left, we were pretty mad. We did talk to a few media outlets about it, but everyone was talking about it. No matter where you went, people were like, that was like almost comical how rigged it was.
It was like a mafia.
It was pretty bad. So we definitely have strategized with other people after the convention was over about how we can fix that in the future, and we definitely have some strategies to ensure that that doesn't take place again, or try to overcome it if it does in the following convention. So not to discourage you from not going to convention, because there's no point. The point is that we have to absolutely fill the rooms as much as humanly possible with our supporters, so that this doesn't happen again, and also to get on top of it way earlier.
That's a really interesting point that I need to interrupt you about, because I was speaking to a few of our RightNow supporters who are delegates who are in that room, because I want to kind of get a feel for them, like, oh, that was really brutal, that was sham, that was super, super corrupt. I wonder how bad of a taste is in their mouths. Like, are they just going to leave now? And almost to a person, the dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of supporters that I spoke to who were in that room said, thank God I was in that room. I'm so happy that I was there to at least fight against this. I just wish there were more of us. So that was really, really, really encouraging to hear.
And one thing I don't understand is that the next day, in the plenary sessions, and I know that there's way more people voting, but we do have these little tablets. So you can vote yes or no on the tablet, and it immediately tallies and it shows you the vote result 5 seconds later. Why don't they just do those in the breakout rooms? Because that would alleviate any tension or any subjective vote count, and people can't argue with the tablets. So
probably for that exact reason.
Yeah.
Probably for that exact reason. Yeah.
It makes no sense. They already have them there, so just have them the day before as well. Anyway, yeah, you're right. But that should be something that they should do in the future if it's ever discussed, or to like even have it in the Constitution or have it in a policy or something. I don't know, whatever. So anyway, we do the constitutional breakout room. Then there's the social policy room. That one was a lot better because like there was no arguing with these numbers, and Robert Batherson wasn't the chair, it was some other dude. And also they have to count every vote because it's only the top 10 in that room that make it through to plenary the next day.
And
so
there's
you
30.
have 30 something.
Yeah,
30.
yeah. So the 70 policies that make it to convention, they don't have one breakout room. They have 3 breakout rooms. And it's roughly 25 to 30 roughly each. And so ours in the social, crime, and economic, I think, I can't remember. You have like different, you'll have like foreign policy together with like military and like something else, and you'll have environment and natural resources and whatever. So like they have these kind of topical breakout rooms. So all the social conservative policies come into one, and there was no way they could rig that room because everyone there, it was just overwhelming votes.
Yeah. So the top 10 social policies that made it to the plenary the next day were all policies that social conservatives supported and encouraged their voters to vote for. So things that were like safe spaces for women, for biological women, in sports and other places, against transitioning kids or minors. There was one no GST for maternity items.
Palliative care as a right.
Palliative care.
In the Canada Health Act. Is being like the party itself was already against assisted suicide, but it was adding also specifically against assisted suicide for mental health reasons.
Then there were some COVID ones, which I can't think of off the top of my tongue, but basically like against mandatory vaccinations and things like that. So anyway, the top 10 were all like overwhelmingly voted into the plenary. The people at the no mics were all people from Quebec.
Doing the work for us, except for the GST one, because that one did come from Quebec.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a few pro-life MPs that went up to, I think it was Gerard Dettel's riding, I could be wrong. And they were kind of making fun of him and saying to him in French, like, "Oh, Gerard, like, thank you for this strong pro-life policy." And he's like, "What are you talking about?"
I was actually thinking about this recently because a lot of the people, both in the breakout and in the plenary, well, specifically in the plenary, the next day when we were voting on these policies and amendments to actually become official party policy, when they were at the no mics, a lot of the people would use the reasoning like the world is watching or like the country is watching, like liberals are watching. And I was thinking to myself, who cares? Like you're actually being an official opposition party with having opposition policies, and you have the majority of Canadians on side. So like, good. It's good that they're watching. Like this is only going to help you electorally. I always find that such an odd reasoning. If I ever go up to the yes mic, I'm going to combat that specific talking point because nobody ever does, and it's completely ludicrous.
It was either that or it was we have to make sure that Pierre Poilievre gets elected. We can't talk about anything that doesn't deal with hashtag just inflation or housing or whatever. And I remember one person saying, yeah, and I want to see a Pierre Poilievre majority for 20 years. And then like all the sycophantic staffers in that little corner in the plenary were like, yay. And then the other 2,300 people were like dead silent. Like basically, I would rather have this policy implemented than 20 years of not implementing this policy. If that's what you're saying, which is basically what they're saying.
So, like the most controversial ones would I think be the transgendered ones, like the against transitioning minors and the safe spaces for biological women one. And the minor one I think was 70% of the room voted in favor of it, and the biological women one was like 90% or 89%, something like that.
Are you talking about the breakout or plenary?
I'm talking about the plenary, like when every single delegate voted. So these were like huge majorities of people in the room who voted overwhelmingly in favor of these policies. What's different about the plenary when you have the little voting tablets is not only is it the majority of votes, it's also the majority of provinces and territories. So if you have to actually pass those two qualifications for it to become official party policy, and both of those, I think even in every province it was a majority.
Every province, and the territories are combined to be considered one province for the double majority. Every province in the double majority voted in favor of those policies overwhelmingly. And I will also say, so there are two plenary sessions on the last day, right? There's one for policy, which will include the top 10 policies that were approved from the 3 breakout sessions, right? So they only discussed 30 at most. But earlier in the day, there's a plenary session for the Constitution, which was a joke because there was like 5, I think, constitutional amendments that they discussed because the staff had corrupted to make sure that they didn't get out of the breakout room. But the ones that we were able to sneak through at the beginning, they were passed by huge, overwhelming margins, which leads me to think that if we actually had got all those constitutional amendments out of the policy breakout room into the plenary the next day, then the Constitution would have been opened up quite a bit.
For sure.
Tons of transparency for nominations, for leadership races, all that type of stuff.
Yeah. So then we had the next day we had like we said, the plenary. The morning was the Constitution, the afternoon was the policy, and then that was it. And then the night before, after all the breakout rooms, there was the speech by Pierre. And so he had his wife come out first, and she did a 15-minute thing, and then Pierre came out. Now, just like in terms of practicality, this speech was scheduled for 5:00 after a full day, all day of being in these breakout rooms. And he came on an hour late. So it was about 6:00. Then his wife came out 6:15, and then he spoke for an hour. And this is all during dinner time. So, I mean, there's only so many times you could hear axe the tax and affordable housing. So Scott and I pieced out after 20 minutes.
It was interesting though, because I'll say we were sitting beside each other, right? And we were sitting kind of toward the back, and I'd been sitting all day. I'm sick of sitting. So I stood up and I stood at the back with some current and former staffers. And that way I could kind of see the whole room. And it was kind of weird because they got Pierre to do his speech in the middle on a little dais, on a little stage, which he usually does. But he wasn't raised, and it wasn't like we were in a stadium seating either. So unless you were in the first few rows, you couldn't really see him. And you couldn't really hear him either.
The sound sucked.
The sound did suck. So Alissa sat amongst the people, amongst party members, and I kind of observed. So at the beginning, the first time he says axe the tax, or he says something bad about Justin Trudeau, everyone gets up and standing ovation, which is to be expected. And then about 10 minutes later, when he kept saying those lines, you had all the sycophant MPs and staffers around him at the front. They would stand up on cue like trained seals and arf, 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 slap their fins together. And then, but everyone else, the other 2,000 people in the room, they stopped. They would maybe politely clap or something, but it goes to show that only takes you so far. They can only get even your most core base only so excited. And then after about 15 minutes or whatever, because he kept talking about inflation and housing, interest rates and things like that, which again, by the way, as someone who has a minor in economics, I'm sorry, but if you keep saying we're going to have low housing prices and low interest rates, you're not going to have both. You just can't have both. So just stop lying. Do what Baroness Thatcher did and be honest with the people and say, listen, we're going to have to fix what Labor did here for the next 10 years. The first 3 or 4 are going to suck because it's going to be high interest rates so we can get prices down. But after that, we'll be clear sailing, and that's exactly what happened. So take a page out of history and learn a little bit. Also, get an actual degree or a minor in economics and not just poli-sci. But anyway, I digress. So I went up to Alissa and said, listen, he's just yammering on about this stuff. It's not anything I'm actually interested. I already have a minor in economics. I'm hungry. I want a cocktail. Let's just peace out. So we did. We grabbed some pizza, and then we were done eating, and I said, oh, how did the speech go, Alissa? Can you check Twitter or X or whatever the hell it's called now? And you said it was still going.
Yeah,
We
it was still
grabbed
going.
we grabbed a pizza. We walked for like 10 minutes. 15 minutes, found a place, sat down, ordered. Tell them what our order was. I ordered a cocktail. They bake the pizza. It comes out. We eat it. We pay. We leave. And he's still going, talking about Lord knows what. Those poor people.
And it's funny too, because if you looked at Twitter after, like, it was, people were talking as if it was the best political speech since, like, what did Mulroney say? Like Diefenbaker or
I don't
something?
know.
Like,
I don't know.
just these insane praises for what was pretty bland speech.
Like, there were moments, right? There were moments, and they got their clips, and, like, that's fine. But that was, like, maybe 5% of the speech.
Yeah. Anyway, I have heard way better speeches.
He also used a teleprompter, and the teleprompter was on the floor, so he's looking down. It was weird.
Yeah.
It was because I had a couple of people from the media come up to me and said what I thought about that. I'm like, I was in the back, Alissa was in the middle, so like we didn't see that, and they were said, oh yeah, it looked really bad on TV, and then I watched later, I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of weird, but whatever.
Yeah. Like, I'd much rather sit and listen to Jason Kenney use
Oh
no
my
teleprompter.
goodness. Yes.
Talk about things that are way more substantive.
That was one of the best speeches I've ever been to. It was only supposed to be a half hour. It was 90 minutes. There were grown men that stood up like 37 times to give a standing ovation that were crying because he was actually talking about real things. Granted, this is before the COVID-19 restrictions, but...
So, yeah, that was a little bit mind-numbing. But overall, I think what we talked about in the blog was that the good was all the social policy that was passed. The bad, which wasn't so bad, was the National Council that was elected, because we do have one more pro-grassroots national councillor than what we previously had, although we still don't have a majority, which is something we'll need to work on. And then the ugly was, of course, the rigged constitutional amendment breakout room.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So like overall, like I would say, when the Aaron O'Toole people said that it was going to be in Quebec City, they obviously did it, so it'd be difficult for us to get our people there, because that was, at that point, the only way that the membership could get rid of him as leader was the automatic leadership review at the following convention, which, of course, they did 2 years later. So it was originally scheduled for August long weekend of 2023. Then, of course, we all know what happened with that. And then there was a leadership race. Pierre wins the leadership race. They ask National Council to move the convention from August to September. And I thought that was kind of weird. Like, why do that? And then when I was looking at flights and everything, it's like, oh, I get it. Because no one could get there. So that's why. And then people are working, and it's different from summer. People can incorporate that into maybe summer vacations or something like that. So it's kind of one of those things where the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah. Yeah, there wasn't a huge difference between O'Toole and Pierre. I don't think it would have been that much different of a convention. Probably the same games would be played. Probably even worse, because they would have wanted to win that leadership vote. But, I mean, I'm glad there wasn't a leadership vote at this convention.
Yeah.
I would have hated for it to be dragged on. So I am glad that was all settled. But I mean, there's still a lot of frustrating things, but nothing that can't be fixed, nothing that we can't work on and strategize on more. And again, like we always say, this is the only tangible political party that we can advance our policies in at the moment, that actually gets elected. The majority of caucus is on side or has pro-life leanings or social conservative leanings. So this isn't to discourage anyone. It's just to give you a very behind the scenes look from a social conservative perspective, because I'm sure, if you've read or seen different tweets or things on social media, it was like all gummy bears and candy and cotton candy, but there was a lot of stuff that was frustrating about it and also very good about it. So overall it wasn't too bad. I don't know, what are your final thoughts?
I can only think about gummy bears right now. I freaking love gummy bears.
Yeah. So
Sometimes I'm a really big sicko, and I'll bite one gummy bear, and I'll bite another gummy bear, and then I'll combine them, like different colors. Do my own little surgery, because you get all the different flavors. Not that they taste like anything.
You have too much time on your
They
hands.
taste like green, or they taste like orange, or they taste like weird tan white, whatever that's supposed to be. All the
I
flavors,
do
all
love
the
that
natural
tan
flavors.
white flavor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that went off topic fast.
We live in a world that grows through communication.
Every connection comes from a dream to be heard and realized.
To welcome a better future. What are your dreams?
LaRosse Media will help communicate your vision through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Start building connections to your future audience. Visit larosmedia.com.
And be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.
Oh my gosh, when I was at Scott's like in August, yeah, it was August. What was that chocolate you gave me? I never thought I would hate chocolate so much.
Ritter. It's a German chocolate. I think it's from Bavaria, and it was rum raisin. Oh, so good.
Oh, if I was 97 years old, I probably would have liked that, but alas, I am not. It was disgusting. That is not what chocolate should taste like. That wasn't even chocolate. There were maybe chocolate elements to it.
It's actual good chocolate. It's actually good chocolate from Europe.
We could not have different taste buds.
But you
Mine are
enjoyed
far more refined.
you enjoyed the pork baby back ribs, though.
Yes, I did. Those were delicious.
Okay.
Don't you worry. Stroking your ego. Yeah, Scott like smoked these ribs for 8 hours or something. I could never pay that much attention to detail.
It is
to
the
food.
3-2-1 method. 3 hours just slow to go in direct, 2 hours in the foil, and then 1 hour again with the last 15 minutes I put on my my glaze, and yeah, they just fall off.
Yeah, they were good.
Let's talk about quickly this week before we wrap it up here.
What?
Well, what happened yesterday?
What did you just say? Let's talk about this week?
Yeah,
Is that
what
you said?
the big news this week? What happened yesterday?
Yesterday was the 1 million March for Kids. So people all across the country went to different places in their cities, mostly in front of their legislatures or city halls, and they protested against gender ideology, specifically in the school system. And it was pretty wild. The Pierre and the Conservative OLO told their MPs not to talk about it, which they all followed. You didn't hear a peep out of the Conservatives. Jagmeet Singh marched with the counter protesters. Justin Trudeau tweeted about it from God knows wherever he is, some place else in the world. Do you know where he is? He's
I thought he
not
was
in
in
India.
I think he's in New York at the UN Assembly.
New York. Right. And lots of different MPs talked about right-wing fanatics. And yeah, there was basically no opposition to that except for the people. And the majority of the people, I would say, were Muslims and new Canadians of different ethnicities, and they were the majority all across the country. They were the leaders and the organizers because they're absolutely sick of this ideology being pushed specifically on their children in the school system. A lot of the signs were stick to math and science and, stop controlling our kids. And it was really, some of the counter protesters were really, really creepy. Like I saw this one video and they were like, whose school? They were like, our schools. Whose kids? Our kids. And like, I can guarantee you that 99% of the people in that who were shouting that had no kids. It's super freaky to think that you're screaming about my child. Like, it was weird. There was some crazy lady who was screaming at little kids saying, go like suck on your mommy's titties and just saying the C word to them, like just really atrocious stuff. Yeah, there were some really odd videos. There was like a elderly lady who got her like face smashed into a police car. But I mean, overwhelmingly, these protests were totally fine. These are extreme examples of different places, but lots of police presence. The ralliers far outweighed the counter protesters, even though like a lot of union members were there. But I mean, if you go on social media, you would think it was the opposite, because the pro-trans, pro-transitioning kids crowd was like dominating, because people were instructed not to say anything about it. But I think it was really good because, like, Angus Reid came out with polling saying that, 80% of Canadians agree with parental consent if their child wants to socially transition in school. It was like 14% disagree. So despite what social media says, the opposition is in the extreme minority. And then you did have some positive things, like Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick just being an absolute goat on this issue. Go out and greet the protesters, talk to them, talk to the media. Education Minister Bill Hogan also talked to the media, and they did a really good job. And I love it. It's great. And I hope that more premiers and politicians follow suit, because he is the leader when it comes to this issue, for sure.
Yeah, this is really interesting. So someone was explaining to me that a lot of people who come from new Canadian communities, they can't really opt out of the public school system, like a lot of people like you or myself, Alissa, whose families have been here for 100 plus years, because we already have kind of the infrastructure set up. A lot of people within our communities, English is very strong, obviously, in our homes, because the vast majority of us are English speakers. And so if we want to homeschool, we can homeschool, and we don't have to worry that they're not going to get the language. Because if you have someone who has come here to Canada from India or the Middle East or parts of Africa, they would be very, very apprehensive to homeschool, even though they would want to protect their children from gender ideology, because their English, they would feel, and they're probably not wrong, that their English isn't strong enough to pass that on to their children so they can go out and participate in regular Canadian society. So they don't have that. A lot of kind of people within our circles, they'll either have private schools amongst the Dutch Reform, for example. Even Catholics are opting out of publicly funded Catholic system here in Ontario, because in many aspects it's even worse than the publicly funded public system. And they'll have their own private Catholic schools that's even supported by some of the bishops here in Ontario. So like we kind of already have that infrastructure. If I can say, like, the regular white Christian families have been here for 100 plus years, Canadians. Those who struggle with English, maybe they aren't Christian, and maybe they live in a place like the GTA, where my father-in-law actually was going home from Niagara Falls, where he works, back to Etobicoke, and he called us the other night. This is at like 8 o'clock at night, mind you, and he was going from one exit on the highway to another because there were a few different accidents that happened. It looked like it was a bit of a, what do you call that, where you have that domino effect?
Pile up?
Kind of like a pile up. Those two exits were less than 5 kilometers apart, and like almost an hour and a half, over an hour to make that distance. My point being is that for a lot of these new Canadians who live in the GTA, who live in Vancouver, this is kind of their everyday life. And so they can't necessarily afford the time to homeschool, even if their English is really good, because of just the distance and time for work to get back home. So these protests are generally being driven by those in the Muslim community. It includes people from, Sikh communities, Hindu communities, Orthodox Jew communities, people from Central and Eastern Europe, for example, who might be Eastern Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. All these new Canadian communities, because they don't have these options that you and I might have, And that really hit me hard, because that's really scary. And that's when you get borderline desperate. And so that's when I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense as to why they're waking up. This is also a huge political opportunity. And when you mentioned, there is complete silence. Like you have, and this is why, because I know some people on Twitter are like, oh, really? Like Justin Trudeau is going to go with the 14% extremists. He's gone with the 14% extremists on the abortion issue for like 10 years and does well on it. And the reason he does well on it is because the other side, being the Conservative Party of Canada and the professional conservatives that were so genius to rig that constitution room so that actual good conservatives wouldn't become candidates in the next election, are terrified. And so on an issue where 80% plus Canadians are with you, like on, hey, maybe we shouldn't socially transition children without parents' notification at the very least, just like 84% of Canadians are against or are supportive of legally restricting sex-selective abortion, the Conservatives are scared shitless. And so that's why Justin Trudeau wins on this issue, and that's why he is going to win on this issue.
Yeah, like when conservatives say, oh, we can't talk about these social issues because we'll get attacked by the liberals, what I hear is, oh, we can't talk about these social issues because the liberals will attack us and we're way too dumb to be able to counterattack or to go on the opposition. Like, you're stupid enough to not come up with the most basic fundamental talking points, to not separate children from their kids, to not abort baby girls because they're girls. These are so freaking easy. These are the most easy talking points humanly possible, and you're dumb enough to not be able to come up with them because they do have overwhelming support. They do have majority support, and yet you're cowering behind the carbon tax and not being able to talk about issues that people actually care about.
Well, and then you see on the provincial side, they're starting to learn, right? So we have Blaine Higgs in New Brunswick. Then when we have going all the way to the other coast, we have the BC Conservatives who have adopted this position, the Blaine Higgs position, for I think like over a year now. And there was a couple of by-elections earlier this summer and the spring where they did a lot better than BC United, which is the old BC Liberals, which was actually a conglomerate, if you will, of federal Liberals and federal Conservatives. So many of those federal Conservatives have now abandoned the BC United because they're just as bad as the federal Conservatives on this issue, if not just the same as federal Liberals. And then the BC Conservatives do better in these by-elections. They don't win the seats, but they do better than the BC United. And then in the last few polls, they're polling ahead of the BC United. And then on top of that, you had a BC United MLA cross the floor to join the one and only BC Conservative MLA. And now with two MLAs, now they have official party status in the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia, which matters because now they can have their own office. They get a little more money for research and things like that. So you're winning there. In Saskatchewan, they almost...
Yeah, but I do want to talk about BC just for a second, because yesterday, the leader of the BC Conservatives came out again in favor with the protests, saying that they're anti-SOGI, that they're going to get rid of it, that they're in favor of parental rights. And then you had Kevin Falcon, who's the leader of the BC United Party, saying the exact opposite. So now you have two of these parties who are virtually had similar members saying the exact opposite things on this very pertinent issue. So it'll be interesting to see how that relates as well moving forward.
And then in Saskatchewan, they had a wake-up call with their own by-election this past summer where they lost two in Regina, and they went down big time in a rural riding where this was an issue. And Sask United, which is a startup party, a right-wing startup party in Saskatchewan, was they were running with this issue. They had a former Saskatchewan party MLA leave the caucus, and she's now the leader of the Sask United Party. And they learned because Scott Moe and the Saskatchewan party government announced that they are going to not only change policy like what Blaine Higgs did in New Brunswick, but they're actually introduced legislation on this. And then you had people on the other side saying, oh, well, then we'll just take you to court. And he said, fine, go ahead. Even if we lose, we're going to invoke the notwithstanding clause. So there you go. In Manitoba, the Progressive Conservative Party Manitoba, late to the game. But leading up to the election and during the election, I think, Alissa, you said even yesterday they made announcements on this, and they're starting to run on this issue as well.
Yeah.
In Ontario, begrudgingly, Stephen Lecce basically saying, hey, school boards, like, you actually need to talk about reading, writing, and arithmetic and not this crazy gender ideology stuff. So they're kind of molasses on it, but like there is a change there from compared to a year ago. You have all of these right-wing political parties across Canada provincially running with this, doing well with it, increasing in the polls, doing better in by-elections. And then you have the federal Conservatives, and you have a few different, and you have former federal Conservative staffers, people involved with the Pierre Poilievre leadership campaign, talking glowingly about these protests and about what they represent. And then you had a couple other people saying, oh, wow, this coalition is falling apart for Justin Trudeau. Is it? Because if you don't have federal Conservatives come in and speak to Muslims and Sikhs and Hindus and Orthodox Jews and Eastern Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, regular Catholics, and Protestant Christians, if you don't have people from that political party reaching out to these groups to talk to them about their number one issue, and for Muslim parents in suburban GTA, this is their number one issue, I can guarantee you, way more than housing prices, way more than carbon taxes. Not that those are not important issues, but this is definitely their number one. They're not switching to you. At best, they're just not going to vote.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, conservatives are just sitting pretty right now, thinking that if the election was tomorrow, they'd win. But the fact is, the election isn't going to be tomorrow. It could be in 2 years. And if you're consistently demotivating your base by remaining quiet on issues that they care about and only harping over and over and over again about the carbon tax, so much so that it makes me want to support it because I don't want to listen to you drone on about it anymore, then we'll see what happens in 2 years. Don't think that you're all safe because of these polling numbers way too far in advance when it comes to the election. So yeah, this is something that I think the Conservative Party is late on. But in another podcast, I really want to kind of explore and talk about what the progression that one premier had that led to a huge awakening to all the other premiers, and how that could happen with other social issues besides this one. Because you could really take everything that Blaine Higgs did, from the media attacks to the opposition attacks to people in his own party trying to attack him and taking him down, and how he stood firm and he was unwavering, and it was all a facade. They had no support. They could not get him out as leader. They couldn't even get, 26 letters against him. The media was just, preaching to thin air because nobody cared what they had to say. It didn't affect people's opinions at all. So all these things that conservatives are constantly horrified about, oh my gosh, the Liberals are going to attack us, the opposition is going to attack us, the media is going to attack us. Well, that's what happened to Blaine Higgs, and now he's doing even better. So like in the grand scheme of things when it comes to political issues, I think it will be very interesting to take a look at how he approached this topic and how he really pushed it forward and made a domino effect with all the other premiers. And now, these parties are doing so much better in the polls. I think it's a kind of one for the history books on how to deal with social issues. That's for sure.
Courage is contagious. And I'd be very, very curious because right now, as we're speaking, we have the provincial by-election with the provincial general election happening back home in Manitoba.
Yeah.
And, I am very, very curious if the Progressive Conservative Party of Manitoba adopted this position, maybe even as late as February or March, as opposed to, in the dog days of August, if they would have done better and if they would have had a better shot at winning the provincial election. If they do keep the NDP to a very, very slim majority or maybe a minority, or if they were even to win the most amount of seats themselves, the Progressive Conservatives, I'd be very, very curious as to if that was one of the reasons why.
Yeah, when the peak happened.
And if they had adopted earlier, like the Saskatchewan Party is doing in advance of their own general provincial election, which is scheduled for next year in 2024, if they can help save their government in that regard. And it reinvigorates. It doesn't just save the government. It reinvigorates the government because it gives you a new purpose for being there, for being in office.
Yeah. Not being the Liberals is not good enough. And that's what a lot of these conservatives rely on. Oh, well, we're not the other party. Okay, we'll prove it.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm sorry. This is what I tell people now. I am so severely disinterested in balancing a Liberal budget.
Yeah.
Because even in the budget, like, what are you cutting? Are you cutting wokest crap? Because you're probably not. You probably just want to make sure it balances. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I want you to use the power of the purse to affect actual change. So anyway, one other thing I will say is that at the convention, when those policies got passed, we were told, or at least I told you, because I had 3 different people either from the OLO or very well connected to the OLO tell me, oh, Scott, it's going to be great. These policies on this anti-gender ideology for kids policies are going to pass. We all know that. We're not going to fight it. There's no sense in fighting it. And the leader has great talking points. Well, no talking points. Silence.
Yeah, and actually an internal memo from OLO was leaked yesterday specifically telling MPs not to talk about it. But then after they told MPs not to talk about it, they gave some talking points which were actually pretty good. So use those talking points. If you have the talking points, if Pierre has already talked about it, just repeat do the bare minimum. How is that difficult? It just is incredibly frustrating with all the same mistakes being made all over again. So they're relying way too heavily on current polls, I think, and not looking at the future, which I think will be a big mistake.
Yeah, time will tell.
All right. Well, that is it for this week's episode of the Stinking Albatross Podcast. Make sure that you follow us on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Basically, anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can subscribe so you know when a new episode is coming out. Make sure you check out our summer speaker series because we had some really cool guests then. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Bye for now.
Nature communicates with us in a universal language. The sunrise starts a new day. The sunset marks our accomplishments.
The most beautiful communication is where the speaker and the listener match perfectly and understand the same message.
Your future audience is waiting to hear from you. What message do you need to share?
At LaRosse Media, we fashion beautiful communications through our professional video production services and marketing strategies.
Create your own most beautiful message. Visit larosmedia.com and be sure to check out our extended service options.
Dream, produce, market, succeed with LaRosse Media.
Serving Canada from coast to coast to coast.